I have a very exciting one here for you today. We're going to be talking about domains and exactly how they work. You might be looking to build a website, or perhaps you're just extremely curious about how the internet works. It's best to explain things simply and get back to basics so we can build our knowledge from the ground upwards. And if I can get this, you can too. And I'm living proof that you don't need to be a computer geek to understand exactly how this all works. Do you know it's not actually possible to own a domain name? You actually only lease it. And if you stay to the end of the video, I'll show you a great way that you can secure your own domain name for around £1. A website is comprised of files and a database. And underneath the files, we typically have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and static image files. And a database is, in a simple way of explaining it, a series of tables which hold data such as blog posts, customer information, orders, and these two work together to build a website. Now, all of this information is stored on a server. We're going to draw a little box here and call that a server. That server, to be publicly available on the internet, needs to be assigned an address, similar to your door number to your own house, either an IPv4 or an IPv6 address. If we use, for example, the IPv4 address for the domain example.co.uk, that is 91.184.216.34. I won't give the IPv6 address because that's a lot longer and I simply don't remember it. But the IPv4 address is 4 blocks of numbers separated by these dots. Now, I wouldn't say that that's a particularly catchy or memorable name. So you wouldn't say, oh, I just bought my new laptop from 91.184.216.34. Who's going to remember that? But what you would remember is I bought my new laptop at speedylaptops.co.uk, for instance. Now, how does Speedy Laptops map and point to this IP address? Now that's handled by the DNS, which is the domain name system. And for us to understand that, we have to understand something called name servers and top-level domains. Let's take, for example, the domain name example.co.uk. Lovely. The last part of the domain name after the final dot, which is UK, is referred to as the top-level domain. So TLD. And this could be your .com, .uk, .org, .net, or .even .edu, among others. And these top-level domains are overseen by operators. And for the .uk top-level domain, this is overseen by a company called Nominet. The .co is referred to as the second-level domain, which could be gov.uk or ac.uk. There are a number of other second-level domains, but this essentially just refers to the characters before the .uk. A domain name can be numerical with numbers from 0 to 9, lowercase letters from the alphabet A to Z, or hyphens, but it can't typically include spaces, underscores, or special characters. And the total domain length can't be longer than 253 characters, including the dots. So in this example represents the third level domain, co is the second, and the UK is the first. And the first level domain has an operator, and that operator is called Nominet. And Nominet keeps a register of the name servers associated with the specific domain. Now, what is a name server? A name server is a specialized server on the internet which essentially holds all of the settings about the specific domain. These are referred to as the domain name system settings. And this enables the owner to control where the domain name is pointing to. When somebody purchases a domain, they have the facility to specify the name servers, typically either 1 or 2 servers. Now that can actually be often the registrar, the actual company that they purchased the domain with, or a third-party company. Once they've been decided by the owner which company they'd like to use for this. Could be Cloudflare, it could be the registrar themselves. The registrar will submit this information to the top level domain operator. So they will submit that information to Nominet. When you go onto your internet browser and you type in the URL, your internet service provider will recognise that it's a top level domain of .uk. They will know to contact Nominet. Your internet service provider will then contact Nominet and will essentially ask, hello, I'm trying to find out the name servers for the particular domain. Nominet will then say to the internet service provider, sure, that's no problem. The registrar of the domain has already informed us that Cloudflare, or another company, are the name servers and are managing the domain name system settings, the DNS settings. Your internet service provider will then go to that specific name server. Now let's say, for example, that's Cloudflare. Do you like what I did there with the orange? That's the colour of their logo. Now the owner of the domain will have an account with Cloudflare, and in their settings of the domain, they can specify something called an A record or a quad A record, which is 4 A's. Now the A record represents the IPv4 address that they want the domain to point to. Now if you remember earlier, this IP address is here. Now they can specify the A record to be 91.184.216.34, or they can specify the quad A record to be the IPv6 address. These are just some of the settings that the domain owner can specify in the DNS. So your internet service provider now can contact Cloudflare and say, hello, I'm looking for example.co.uk. Please could I have the A record or the quad A record? Cloudflare then says, that's no problem. We're not hiding that information for a proxy, so we're more than happy to give you that information. The internet service provider then goes, aha, great, I know where to find example.co.uk. So it goes on a little journey and it looks through the roads and knows exactly where to find this specific server. When you go through your internet browser, you are searching through either port 80 or port 443. Port 80 is for HTTP and port 443 is HTTPS. We all recognise is the one secured with that little padlock and has to have an SSL certificate. Your internet service provider has found out the IP address and has gone on a search for that specific IP, just like you have in your sat-nav. As soon as you know the door number and where you're going, you can simply get there. The internet service provider goes through one of these ports, 443, to access the server. That port is open on the server if it's been set up correctly. Knocks on the door and says, hello, I'm trying to retrieve the web page for example.co.uk from this server. The server says, that's no problem. I have Apache installed, which is a web server, among others such as Lightspeed that could also be used. And port 443 has been opened and there's a handshake set up between the two, and it recognises that it's allowed to retrieve requests through port 443 for the domain name example.co.uk. And it says, I recognise example.co.uk. That's no problem. I will allow you access to those web pages. Now, not any domain can just point to a server and expect to retrieve web pages. This has to be set up properly on the web server to allow access. Otherwise, people can create all sorts of domains and make it look as though they're landing on the correct web page and intercept all sorts of data. So this is why SSL certificates are set up and HTTPS is the secure way to go through to a web page. And the settings behind the scenes on the server enable the server to understand that it's allowed to retrieve requests from example.co.uk, and that's a simple way of putting it. And then the internet service provider says, great, thanks. I'm going to present the information that's on your server for example.co.uk and present that information on a web browser for the user. And the user says, wow, that took a second, that was a bit long. As promised, if you'd like to register your very own .co.uk domain for around £1, then use the link in the description. Fasthosts is owned by a company called Ionos, and they are one of the largest hosting companies globally. So you're in safe hands with them. And remember, if you use the link in the description, I earn a little bit of commission at no cost to you. You don't need to be alone when you're building a website, and I've personally sold millions of pounds worth of items through websites that I've built, and now I'm making guides and assistance of how you can build your own online stores. So if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like and subscribe.